各位，在美国忙着把制造业带回家，中国不断扩大新能源版图的时候，一个声音从新德里传出来。印度反对党领袖胡拉尔甘地在演讲中直言：“中国正在赢得与美国的较量。”这一句话震动了整个印度政坛，因为他不是在谈外交姿态，而是在警告：印度如果继续在制造业上缺位，就会在21世纪的能源革命中被彻底边缘化。这一场演讲发生在印度工程学院的一个讲座上。胡拉尔没有谈政治口号，而是谈地缘政治与工程学的关系。他用一个清晰的历史脉络：英国凭借着煤炭、蒸汽机崛起，美国凭借着内燃机和石油时代成为超级大国。而如今，世界正在进入新的能源转型，从燃料箱到电池，从内燃机到电动机的时代。而在这一场转型中，中国已经遥遥领先。胡拉尔指出，美国依然掌握着消费数据和通讯的主导权，但是在生产数据上，也就是制造链和工业能力上，中国已经占据了决定性的地位。他提醒大家，当一个电视或者无人机被生产的时候，中国拥有他们的生产数据，而美国只掌握它被谁购买的消费数据。这是一个颠覆性的判断。科技竞争的核心不在于 APP 或者是 AI 的算法，而是在生产环节的主权。正因为如此，中国的电池、电动机和光学技术已经构成了新的帝国基石。相比之下，印度和美国在制造端的空白成为了结构性的弱点。在这一套逻辑下，能源转型不再是环保的问题，而是全球权力的重新洗牌。掌握生产、数据、AI 的国家将拥有未来战争和经济的全部支点。胡拉尔进一步指出，乌克兰的战争已经是技术变革的预演，无人机代替了坦克，电机代替了内燃机。他警告说，如果印度不能在制造业上与中国竞争，那么国内的就业结构就会持续的恶化，社会极化将像美国一样加剧。换一句话说，这不是经济的困境，而是政治生存的问题。最后，胡拉尔抛出一个冷静的问题：如果中国成为唯一的生产国，那这个世界还能稳定吗？这是印度版的产业警钟，也是全球南方国家必须面对的现实。在一个能源革命和 AI 融合的时代，谁掌握了生产主权，谁就决定了世界秩序的走向。而印度必须要在伙伴美国和邻国中国之间找到自己的第三条路。让我们看一下视频。
So I believe most of you here are engineering students. Is that correct? Is that fair? Yeah. So I'll start with the mix of geopolitics and engineering, because that's what is going on today. If you look at big empires, and you look at the British Empire, you look at the American Empire, and any other empire, what you find is that they arise in energy transitions. So when you have a transition in energy, the way we move, the power that controls that transition tends to become a superpower. The British controlled steam, the steam engine and coal, they became a superpower. They had the British Navy, and we in India fought that empire, eventually got our freedom in 1947. After the British, the Americans came. Then the Americans managed the transition from coal and steam to petrol and the internal combustion engine. And now we are facing a new transition. We are facing a transition from the internal combustion engine to the electric motor, and from the fuel tank to the battery. And the real fight between the United States, which has a maritime vision of the world, and China, which has a terrestrial vision of the world, is about who is going to manage this energy transition. Who's going to control battery technology? Who's going to control the electric motor? Who's going to control the optics that will allow you to move? And if you look, people say, okay, we're moving into a phase of electric cars. But if you step back slightly, what you find is that a drone, an electric car, a high-speed train, they all have the same basic architecture. It's an electric motor with batteries and then some way of communicating with the world. Optics, and then you can add software and AI to that architecture. And so the entire battle that is taking place, the geopolitical battle, is about who is going to manage this transition from the internal combustion engine to the electric motor. And so far, the Chinese are winning that battle. They're winning the battle because they control battery technology, they control the electric motor, they control optics. And they control it because they are the biggest manufacturer, the biggest producer on the planet. Right? The United States used to be the biggest producer. Some of the older people here will remember a time when Cadillac was big, Ford was big. And now, instead of Cadillac, you have BYD. You have DJI. So the Chinese control of production is what has created massive political issues, and it's also given them a base to make this transition. So that would be a broad theme that I would put to you for discussion. We, of course, are China's neighbor, and we are close partner of the United States. So we are sitting right in the middle, right in the middle of where the forces are colliding. And they're colliding everywhere. If you look at Ukraine, what's interesting about Ukraine is the electric motor is destroying the internal combustion engine. The drone is destroying armor, is destroying tanks, is destroying artillery pieces that are powered by the internal combustion engine. So what the drone allows you to do and what the electric motor allows you to do is move in ways that an internal combustion engine just cannot do. And another way to think about it is an electric motor allows you to decentralize power. So it allows you to take power in a car and put it into 5 or 6 or 7 different places. It allows you to take power in a drone and decentralize it, maybe put four motors on either corner and make a quadcopter. So that to me is the technological battle that is taking place. On top of all this, you can overlay AI. So from production and from consumption comes data. The Chinese control production data. They're the only ones who know, who produce the data when things are produced. When this TV screen was produced, the Chinese have the data on how it was done. When the speaker was produced, the Chinese have the data on how it was done. The Americans don't. So the Chinese dominate production data, and the Americans in the Western world and in India, they dominate consumption data. So Uber is consumption data. Google is consumption data, right? So that's the data on which AI is going to work. And a lot of people say, well, AI is going to revolutionize things. Absolutely, it's going to revolutionize things. But the person who's going to have power in that revolution is the person who controls the data. And for example, in our part of the world, most of our data is controlled by the United States, by companies like Google, by companies like Uber, by companies like WhatsApp. So the Americans have a distinct advantage when it comes to communication, when it comes to consumption data. And that broadly is the fight that is taking place. Now, any questions you might have, I'd gladly answer. Thank you.
I have seen that you have done an extraordinary leadership in India. And I just want to know, what's your view about India? India is going to be a quite relevant country in the world in the next future. I mean, if you see the numbers of growth in India, if you compare that to China, I mean, you see that India has a lot of future. I mean, is becoming quite relevant in the world. So what's your view about India, and what are the kind of things that you are saying in India in order to have that leadership in the world?
I think, of course, India has tremendous potential. It's 1.4 billion people, the size, I mean, bigger than China now in terms of population. But India is a completely different system than China. So whereas China is very centralized, uniform, India is decentralized and has multiple languages, multiple cultures, multiple traditions, multiple religions. So India is a much more complex system, and India's strengths, which exist, are not necessarily China's strengths. They're different. So they're big systems, but they're different and they operate differently. India also has a very old tradition, spiritual tradition, and a thought system. Very profound and old ideas that are very useful in today's world. The idea of non-violent political action comes from deep within Indian tradition. Mahatma Gandhi was a modern exponent of that. So there's a lot that India can offer to the world in terms of our tradition, our way of thinking, information technology, our engineering capability, our healthcare system. So I'm very optimistic about India. But at the same time, there are also fault lines within the Indian structure. There are risks that India has to overcome.
Which are those risks that you see?
The single biggest risk is the attack on democracy that is taking place in India. Because India has multiple religions, multiple traditions, multiple languages, and India actually is a conversation between all its people. And different traditions, different religions, different ideas require space. And that the best method for creating that space is the democratic system. And currently there is a wholesale attack on the democratic system in India. So that's a risk. This other big risk is risk between different conceptions, different parts of the country, right? Some 16, 17 different languages, different religions. So allowing these different traditions to thrive, giving them space to express themselves is very important for a country like India.
Talking about one of the things that you have said about how do you see humanity and politics in the world, there is a concern about polarization in the world. How do you see that? How to deal with polarization? How leaders as you can introduce a new view in the world in which polarization maybe is not the right way?
I mean, from our perspective, I can only talk about what we are seeing in India. Large country like India is struggling, even though we have good economic growth, we are struggling to create jobs for our people. And the reason we are struggling to create jobs for our people is because we are not actually producing, we are not manufacturing. We are a service-based economy, and large countries require a manufacturing base, require the act of production to employ its people. So for us, having a world where China produces everything means that we struggle to employ our people. So for us, fundamentally important thing is to start production and start to compete with China on producing material goods. That is central. A country like India simply cannot manage if it doesn't do that. Most of the people, for example, who are creating the polarization in the United States with Mr. Trump are people who have lost their manufacturing jobs, right? It's the collapse of US manufacturing that has left a huge number of people in the United States and in India and in Europe without jobs. And that's a volatile cocktail, right? So I think what's really important is China has demonstrated to the world how you do production in a non-democratic environment. We cannot do that. We are a democratic environment. We have to have a democratic structure. So for us, what's interesting is, can we develop a model of production, a model of manufacturing that is competitive with China, but in a democratic environment? And that's where a lot of the conversation between countries like the United States and India, Western Europe, is heading.
Once I was in the World Economic Forum with Ricardo Hausmann, he's professor from University of Harvard, and he told me, and he said, Colombia is more India, less China.
Yeah.
Saying that Colombia is more human talent, and that we have to develop the human talent services, for example, software production and so on, rather than industry. Would you agree on that with Ricardo Hausmann?
No, because, look, there is a place for services. But in a country like India, high-tech software services is at best 1%, 2%, 3% of the population. Right? It's a very small number of people who are actually employed in the software industry in India compared to the massive size of our country. India simply cannot succeed economically only on services. We're very good at services, and it's a very important part of the future. It's a very important part of the economy. But you cannot do, a large country cannot do only services. Country like Singapore maybe can do it, you know. But large country like India can't do it. And by the way, I mean, he's a professor in Harvard. He's finding out that America can't do it, right? Because the levels of polarization that America is facing are not sustainable. And the entire political conversation in America, what Mr. Trump is proposing is a return to manufacturing, which I don't believe is possible for them, right? But that's what Mr. Trump is proposing. And pretty much any country now will tell you, big country will tell you that, look, having a world where China is the only producer is seriously problematic for us.